Welcome back to Popsville, where Grandpa Keith and his neighbor Martin are hard at work making way for another big junk haul. But this scrap party is about to come crashing down. Back from a school workshop about Pops, it might be time for Adita to start putting her knowledge to practice.
Did you know that when you dismantle old electronics and car parts, you're exposing yourself and others to persistent organic pollutants? Don't you know what Pops are and their dangers? Well, come, let me show you.
When we dismantle outdated electronics like old TVs, computer monitors, and smartphones, we expose ourselves and our families to highly hazardous chemicals that can affect our health in the long and short term. Not so fast, Martin. This goes for you too. Improper dismantling and disposal of end-of-life vehicles can also release dangerous fumes, which can make your family and those around you very ill. Burning plastic from cables and other e-waste can also create health risks. But if you follow these simple tips, you can prevent the worst from happening. When ready to get rid of your old electronics, contact authorized recyclers and dealers on proper instructions on how to safely dispose of unwanted items. While it's nice to have new things, buying too much can overwhelm our homes with clutter. If you need to purchase, choose long-lasting products or items that are highly recyclable to reduce these hazards. Make sure to check the labels on carpets and mattresses before purchasing, as certain countries require that these products are manufactured with flame retardants that may be hazardous when exposed to us over time. For a safer alternative, consider switching to carpets or mattresses made with POPs-free materials. And finally, it's very important to recycle. Recycling often helps reduce any buildup of unwanted items in homes and yards, keeping us all free from potentially hazardous pollutants. For more information on recycling or on disposing products of concern, contact your local waste management agency or visit stopthepops.com for more details. Sometimes danger lurks where you least expect it. The more you know, the healthier you can grow.
Greetings to everyone looking and listening to this broadcast. Currently, we're in the studio at the TDC Home and Building Depot in St. Kitts, one of the private partners to what we are calling the POPs Awareness Campaign. And when I say POPs, I'm referring to persistent organic pollutants. There are several different activities attached to this project, and they're ranging over St. Kitts and Nevis, from radio and television interviews, as well as poetry and spoken word competitions, of which I will mention a little bit later. Today in studio with me, I have two distinguished gentlemen. The first, of course, is Dr. Marcus Natter. And Dr. Marcus Natter, if I may refer to a very long and impressive curriculum vitae, he is currently the Science and Research Manager at the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards. Mr. Natter would have earned his doctorate's degree in 2008 from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln in the field of chemical and materials engineering. His research and professional interests include the characterization of novel materials, radiation detection and measurement, sound management of chemicals and wastes, as well as environmental protection and climate resiliency. Sitting next to Dr. Natter is Mr. Edward Clarkson. Mr. Edward Clarkson is one of the senior managers at the TDC Home and Building Depot in St. Kitts, and he has over 25 years in the retail business, specifically with a focus on agriculture, horticulture, pesticides, insecticides, conservation of the environment, farmlands, livestock management, and other areas. And of course, the gentleman is a UB graduate. This afternoon, as I said, we're here under the auspices of what we call the BCRC, which you'll hear a little bit about later. It's headquartered in Trinidad, and of course, it falls under what we're being told is the Stockholm Convention. Again, the good gentleman will explicate that a little bit. But the BCRC, headquartered in Trinidad, is responsible for broadcasting and training and technology transfer across the Caribbean. Hence, we're here today to interact with the public and provide you with some information. Now, many persons, when they hear the term POPs, might think of a grandfather, might think of popping popcorn, or another definition. Dr. Natter, could you walk us through, slowly, based on your expertise, exactly what do we mean when we mention the term POPs?
Thank you so much, Mr. Mills. Persistent organic pollutants. That is the explanation for the acronym. And so POPs, the first word there that represents the P, is persistent. And when we speak about persistent, we're talking about the fact that they linger for a very long time in the environment. These are man-made chemicals that are toxic and that affect human health and the environment as well as animals. Secondly, the word organic. That speaks to the fact that they are carbon-based materials, carbon-based chemicals. And not only that, they are what is called lipophilic. That means they love to attach themselves to fatty tissue in human beings and in animals. Now, although they are insoluble in water, they are transported via water, air mostly, as well as through the soil. They can matriculate through the soil and end up deep down in the water table as well.
Now, based on what you just said, three things popped out. You said they're long-lasting. I would like you to quantify that for me, please.
Sure.
You also said they're easily transferable. Are you talking about 100 meters or 20 meters? Mm-hmm. What sort of distance and geographic coverage are you referring to? And number three, I got the impression that it's a fatty tissue issue, which might be connected to persons who might be Caribbean terminology, fat individuals, fat people, or obese individuals. Mm-hmm. Is that the correct interpretation?
Okay, so let me take the last one first. All of us, as human beings, we have some percentage of body fat. Yeah? So no matter how slim you are, or as the case may be, how you may be obese, you may be a little chubby, as the case may be, you have some fat in your body. And these toxic chemicals, these POPs, are really attracted to fatty tissue. So much so that even removing fat from your meats that you eat can help if, you know, those meats, the animal in particular, might have been exposed to POPs. When we speak about persisting and for a long time, we're talking about years, many years, not just months. It really lingers in the environment in your bodies for a very long time. We're talking decades, as the case may be. Now, the next thing that we have to also be mindful of is the fact that they bioaccumulate. So anything high up on the food chain, if it eats something that would have contained POPs, that has bioaccumulated through the food chain from small fish being eaten by larger fish, etc., and then being eaten by humans. So that's what makes it very difficult to deal with from a human standpoint if you're a meat eater, or even in plants, because it bioaccumulates and it gets more toxic up the food chain.
And you spoke about being easily transferred.
Yes.
You're talking about across Sinkids, across the Caribbean. Right. What sort of expansivity are you referring to?
Right, so we're really talking about long-range transportation of these chemicals, especially through the air. And we here in the Caribbean, we experience, for example, the dust from the Sahara every so often in the summertime. And that travels, this is well over 5,000 miles away. And this is why the POPs issue is a global issue and is being tackled on a global scale.
Okay, Mr. Clarkson, earlier I said BCRC, the Basel Convention Regional Center for Training and Technology Transfer. I mentioned the Stockholm Convention. I mentioned all sorts of fancy places and fancy associations. Talk to me about where this all started and how St. Kitts and Nevis would have gotten involved.
Okay, good day. Let's do a brief history of why POPs even came about. Back in the day, our forefathers, they decided, look, we need a way to farm commercially, to improve our machinery. And so chemicals were made, and on that basis, it improved livelihood with good intentions. However, studies have shown that certain diseases has developed and they were linked to these chemicals and these pesticides. So a decision was came to whereby the action of phasing out and removing these products from our stores, farmlands, from our industry took place. In 2001, the Stockholm Convention was signed in Stockholm, Sweden. And in 2004, St. Kitts Nevis signed on to that convention. So within the past 17 years, actions have been taken to identify whether or not we have any products that can be classified as POPs, and if there were, to remove that inventory from St. Kitts, and also create the framework whereby the importation of such should not, will not happen. And thereabout, you would have had, for instance, the formation of the Pesticide and Toxic Chemical Control Board. Now, that board oversees the importation of pesticides into St. Kitts. And basically, the way that works, if one wants to introduce a new product, be it a pesticide or a toxic chemical, permission must first be sought from that board. And how that is done, we present the dossiers, the MSDS, which are the material safety data sheets, to the board. A review of the information is done. I think, if I'm not mistaken, Dr. Natter is part of that review committee. And if, for some reason, that product has one of the POPs classified ingredient, then that's a no-go. If it doesn't, and it meets all the other requirements, then registration is granted, after which importation can take place, provided that an application is made for the license.
Where did it all start? How many POPs agents, how many existed at the start? How has it developed? How many do they have now?
Originally, out of the gate, there was a Western cowboy kind of saw the term applied to it. They call them, if you look at your John Wayne movies, they call it the Dirty Dozen. These were the originally identified POPs, and since then, 16 more has been added onto that list. So we have approximately 28 listed POPs.
What's unique about, Dr. Natter, if I may ask you, about it being called the Stockholm? Why the Stockholm Convention? How did that name originate?
Right, so it's a global treaty, and with most treaties, whether they are environmentally focused treaties or financial or otherwise, they're always named for the city in which they were signed. And as my learned colleague said, this particular convention or treaty was signed in Stockholm, Sweden, and adopted in 2001, hence the name.
My research tells me that several Caribbean islands are part of this. I can recall Jamaica, Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Dominica, Belize, Cuba, and the Bahamas, Dominican Republic. But is it just a Caribbean region initiative?
No, not at all, not at all. And we are, in fact, in the Caribbean, we are part of a larger grouping known as Latin America and the Caribbean.
Okay.
And so the Latin American countries, our neighbors in South America, Central America, are also parties to the convention. The European Union and its 27 member states are parties, as well as the African nations, Asia, the Pacific Islands, which sort of mirror our our situation as small island developing states, as well as Australia and New Zealand. So it's a truly global effort to eradicate these POPs.
Approximately how many?
There are about 185 countries now
185
that have signed on to the convention.
And when these guys met, and no disrespect, no doubt, a bunch of beautiful, intelligent ladies are part of the coalition. How did they classify, how did they annex, how did they categorize these groupings of 28 POPs?
That's correct. That's correct.
Are there any groupings
that
we should know of?
Definitely. Well, you know, Mr. Clarkson mentioned the dirty dozen, and these dirty dozen, those original 12 are really in Annex A, which Annex A represents those chemicals, those POPs that are supposed to be eliminated. And when it came into force in 2004, the Stockholm Convention would have set out, you know, guidelines and parameters, time frames by which these things should be done. So in Annex A, you would have things like lindane and endrin and dieldrin and several others.
Aldrin? Is there anything called
Aldrin?
Aldrin? I'm not a good buddy of mine. You're talking about specific chemicals.
Yes.
Okay.
So those are listed for elimination. Now in Annex B, we have a restricted list. And so you have things like DDT. And many persons may know DDT as something that was used to control mosquitoes, especially in our region, in Africa and other countries as well. So the Stockholm Convention would have put that particular chemical as also PFAS, which is found in firefighting foams, amongst other things, in a restricted category. So they still can be used, but the use is guided by parameters of the convention. And then in Annex C, the third annex to the convention, we're talking about those persistent organic pollutants that are unintentionally produced. And these are often byproducts of some process. You know, it can be cement making, it can be in the oil refining business, or most common, it is from the burning of waste, whether it is household or medical waste.
When one hears POPs and PCBs and PFOs and all of these other acronyms, of course, not the beautiful TDC. We know TDC stands for Trade and Development Company, saying it's a Nevis and Anguilla Limited. But all of these acronyms, are we supposed to memorize all of them? Are we supposed to learn each one and the effects? Or help us through, walk us through.
Well, it's more important to know the effects rather than try to recite all of them, you know. And even in our work as whether it's scientists or, you know, retailers and so forth, we are bombarded by many acronyms. So it's more so to be aware of them and be aware of their effects, especially the negative effects that they can have.
Man-made activities, man-coordinated activities, man-organized mistakes, events. What sort of activities can lead to the creation of further POPs, the introduction of the POPs to the ecosystem and the transference of POPs across areas? Yeah, like is it okay if I burn the forest? Is it okay if I have a fire in my backyard? Does that have anything to do with that?
It's not okay to burn.
What about if I control it and put it in a drum? You know, I had a discussion the other day with some authorities. They were telling me no open fires. I said, that's all right. I closed the drum, so it's a closed fire.
It might be a closed fire, but not for the definition that we are looking for. It's still considered indiscriminate burning. So basically, no indiscriminate burning, because what could happen, you could have your household waste, plastics, some rubber, amongst those products that you're burning, and they would, the burning of those products, you would have the generation of unintentional POPs, be it dioxins or furans. Am I correct?
Correct.
And you know, it's interesting because as I look at this document here, and we have some paraphernalia, it Stop the POPs. That seems to be the slogan, to learn, identify, and act. It starts off by saying, stop the POPs, identify, learn, and act in. Now, you just identified some for me. If I look around, I walk down the street, maybe not now, in 1960, 1970, whenever the case would have been. If I walk up an industrial park, if I walked around in my house, what would have been some of the areas, the kitchen or the appliances or on the street where we would have seen objects that would have been a threat in that era?
Yeah, so anything before the 1980s, 1970s, you could consider pops to be almost everywhere, because they were really created, again, these man-made chemicals, they were really created initially with good intentions, right? They were in fabrics to keep them stain resistant, flame retardant. They were found even in appliances. They were found in our non-stick pots and pans, you know, to keep your food from sticking. And they...
May I interrupt? So are you telling me when I'm home making bacon and eggs in my non-stick, sometimes they tell me I don't even need to put in cooking oil in the pan anymore. I should be concerned?
Well, not if you didn't buy that pot in 1960. If you bought it in 1960,
I am just 28. I am just 28, so there's no way I would be allowed to buy a pot or pan in 1960.
Good. So they would have really phased out these things. I'm sure there might be a few still around, but they are definitely not being mass produced in anywhere, because again, like I just said, 185 countries are signed on, so that gives a good coverage across the world in terms of the Stockholm Convention. And so, again, they were found, these chemicals later on were found to be very toxic. Even in our electricity poles, the wooden poles, these were protected by flame retardant chemicals. Again, termite retardants as well were in the poles to prevent them from being eaten by termites. But over the years, through research and so on, it was found that these chemicals, although they had good intentions for them, they had some adverse effects to human health, the environment, and animals. And so they were removed.
I want to talk about some of the other activities affiliated with this project. However, before I go there, I was already planning to throw out all of those pots and pans. You told me I don't have to do.
No, you don't have to.
I don't have a vehicle from that era,
Right.
so I shouldn't have a problem with that either. What I need to ask you is cars, environmental tax, and anything. Are those connected in any way?
Yes, definitely. Of course, one of the main issues with the older cars would have been the exhaust systems and so forth, right? And, you know, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in our Caribbean region especially, we want to protect our ear. And so they would have really pushed to phase out older cars that had exhaust systems that would be giving off too much carbon monoxide, as well as they could contain pops in the various oils. And so, you know, several countries would have instituted environmental levies and so on, and even bans on buying older vehicles. Now, the Stockholm Convention does make exemptions for certain vehicles which are termed maybe antiques, one-of-a-kind vehicles, but nothing that is being mass-produced right now would contain POPs materials or chemicals.
As I slide across and talk about other activities, I also use this platform and take this opportunity to extend thanks to a young lady by the name of Rachel Ramsey, and another one, Laura, who are members of the BCRC in Trinidad. And I remember when we were putting the campaign or the project together, it would have been earlier in the year, and then COVID-19, you know, raised its dirty head, if I may use that term again, dirty dozen, dirty head. So unfortunately, we had some lockdowns and some curfews. We had, and my condolences extended to all of the families and friends and acquaintances of those who would have lost a loved one from COVID. And the protocols changed. We, of course, still wanted to include students, teenagers, and individuals below 12 in this process of learning, which sort of falls on under the umbrella slogan, where we are to stop the POPs, identify, learn, and act. Along that avenue, we developed a poem and spoken word competition. And what this is, across the primary school, both in St. Kitts and Nevis, across all schools, private and public, across 2 levels, primary and secondary, we would have organized a poetry competition. The deadline for submission of the poem is November 29th. And after submitting your poems, the top 5 primary school poems, as well as the top 5 secondary school poems, will be shortlisted and move on to a secondary stage of the competition, which is the spoken word. Thank you again, TDC Group of Companies. They have volunteered their space and other resources for us to be right back here at the TDC Home and Building Depot. And these are some of the acts that TDC Group of Companies, it continues to give back in terms of corporate social responsibility and philanthropy. And we're saying thank you very much. And there are lots of prizes to be had. For example, at the secondary school level, I've been advised that the first prize is $675, the second prize $425, and the third prize $275. For the 2 finalists who didn't make the top places, they'll get $75 each. At the primary school level, there are also some cash prizes. $475 for the first place, $375 for the second place, and $200, as well as the same $75 for the finalists. Teachers, we are asking you to come on board and help the students. And let me underscore, put in red font, Times New Roman at 50-point size. We're asking you to assist or help the students. Of course, we would like them to learn, we would like them to identify, we would like them to be able to act upon POPs. So we're asking you not to write the poem for them and give it to them to submit, but work with them cooperatively, and there is a little token for you as well. We've been advised that apart from the cash prizes, you'll also have another opportunity to win other tangible prizes like stationery and other products that you can use. And my number is 662-6624. The Ministries of Education, both in St. Kitts and Nevis, are partners to this project. We've already disseminated information to the principals of the individual schools. So guardians, parents, children, teachers, feel free to go back to the admin department office and get additional information. As we go through, and I switch from that, talk about the transferability, the transference, the transportation, be it across the air, be it in the soil, be it in the water. Clarkson, if I may, walk me through how POPs, as a collective body of pollutants, could get from point A to point B, be it through the air, be it through the soil, or be it in the water.
Okay, let's take the air for example, and we'll use the example Dr. Natta would have used earlier with the Sahara dust coming all the way from Africa. Now, these particles, they're in the air, and some of the molecules are basically sitting in the stratosphere. The trade winds, for one, would carry them around from one point to another, and then it rains. What happens? These molecules are then brought to the ground. They enter the soil, and from there it is absorbed into plants, or it filters its way all the way down to the water table. Let's say, take St. Kitts for instance. I mean, we have a very high water table, and we also have a slope. Now, what could happen, and God forbid that it doesn't here, that could leach into the water table, and the problem from there is straight on. We drink water from there, or animals drink water from there. We all have fat in our bodies, whether it is 1%, or in my case, maybe about 15.
No comments, sir. No comments.
Yes, and so that could prove detrimental to us because, as we know, as explained by Dr. Natta, that POPs love our fatty tissue.
Rats, rodents, insects, bees, do they play any role at all, intentionally or otherwise?
Let's take some of the insect, and I'll use another example where insects are concerned. We use the pesticide to treat. And some insects are killed on contact. Some are what we call systemic, where they actually have to ingest the pesticide. And what happens, they build up resistance. And as resistance is built up, then you have the application of more of the pesticide before we realize, hey, we should find another mode of action to take care of these insects. So what we are inadvertently doing is increasing the concentration of the POPs in the soil, in our environment.
Let me shift a second, and I've already introduced you. I've already said thank you. You've been from the very start up to this point. But we also had some other professionals who would have joined us on the journey, and I wish to acknowledge them now. For example, Mr. Jermaine Saki Lake, he would have been on a few of our radio tours, and Mr. Lake would have been recently the assistant director in the Department of Health. We would have had Miss Jamela Christopher, who's a registered nurse, and she's now part of the administrative team at the JNF France Hospital. Over in Nevis, we also had Mr. Randy Elliott, who is the director of agriculture over there. And other parties like Maya Bailey, who is the marketing manager, I would have discussed from the start, and quickly she embraced it and said TDC is that sort of company, and they became partners. Of course, Mr. Easton Williams, who happens to be the senior manager here at TDC Home and Building Depot, planning and logistically arranging this and all of the other activities was, as we say colloquially, a walk in the park. Now, as of thank persons who have partnered, that seems to be a positive note. But what we're discussing may leave questions of concerns, anxieties in individuals as they start wondering about the status of St. Kitts and Nevis as it relates to POPs. Dr. Natter, could you give us the good news, if there's any bad news? How do we stand, St. Kitts and Nevis, as it relates to the accumulation or presence of POPs?
Right. It sounds like almost a State of the Union address I need to give. But the state of St. Kitts and Nevis as it pertains to POPs is quite good. Again, we signed on in 2004, and so we would have had 17 years to meet various obligations of the convention to eliminate, reduce the use of POPs. Thankfully, we were never big users of persistent organic pollutants, neither do we produce them, manufacture anything to do with POPs. And so we would have also, through our friends at the Basel Convention Regional Center in Trinidad and Tobago, would have spearheaded other projects where we were able to do some analysis of our stockpiles. We would have had stockpiles of pesticides as well as other chemicals from the sugar industry. You know, we're big sugar producers here in St. Kitts and Nevis, as well as, again, looking at the old transformers from our electrical generation plants on Nevis as well as in St. Kitts. And through all of that research, through all of that analysis, the data has shown that we have no POPs, or if we have POPs, it is at a very, very low level that is not significant enough to harm humans as well and animals as well.
And that's for both St. Kitts and Nevis?
Both St. Kitts and Nevis.
Okay, thank you. Now, Clarkson, you walk me through the cycle of POPs leading up to the consumption, the ingestion and consumption of meat. You put it on the grill, you put it in the oven, you put it in the frying pan. What about POPs making their way into manufactured products? Is that a possibility?
Leading up to possibly the end of the 70s, that was, however, I think with all of the countries who have signed on to the Stockholm Convention, would have reduce or more or less eliminate that possibility. Because back then what used to happen, the lining of the container, they were coated as a preservative of the product that they had inside there. And some of those were found to be pops. And so they were also phased out. So we can be rest assured that going forward, to date, we are okay.
What about in bottled milk? Because you mentioned, it seems to me, chemicals, you spray the crops, they go on the grass, the sheep, the goats, the cattle eat the grass, they produce milk, we drink the milk. Is that also a channel?
That can be a channel if POP is applied. Let's take, for example, that a farmer, he has his fields of grass and he also has cows. He has his favorite grass that the cows love to eat. He wants to ensure that weeds do not take over that grass. So, of course, it's a commercialized operation, so he cannot go with a hoe to take out all those weeds. So he would apply some herbicide, a selective herbicide, to control the weeds and leave the grass that the cows like. Now, if that herbicide happens to contain a POP, chances are that it enters the soil, there is uptake of it from the grass will uptake that into its system. The cow, in turn, would eat the grass. The cow has fatty tissue, and the cow will also produce milk. And, of course, milk also contains some fat. And we know, as stated earlier, that POPs love fatty tissue. And as humans, at the top of the food chain, we drink the milk.
The slogan is identify, learn, act. Stop the POPs. I repeat, identify, learn, act. Stop the POPs. As I look in front of us, I see green color bottles containing fungicides. I see yellow and green boxes saying Miracle Grow. I see white, I see orange. I don't know if I'm colorblind, that looks like red over there to me. I see Trimec and all sorts of fancy names. I'm assuming that these are all top products here available from the TDC group of companies at the Home and Building Depot, which are POPs free.
Correct.
Okay. So any farmer, any person doing backyard gardening, if you're looking for products that are guaranteed not to harm the environment,
we have them right here.
You have them here at the TDC Home and Building Depot. However, Dr. Natta, there are still precautions. Even though they're POPs free, they could still have some harmful effects if not used properly, correct?
That is very correct.
How does one look at a container, box, or bottle? What do we look for to say we should be careful?
Yeah, I mean, we really have to read, first and foremost, very carefully. But over the years, there has been a system developed which is called the Globally Harmonized System for labeling and classification of chemicals. And so, for example, I'll just take this product here. And if you look, you will see some symbols. And I'll show you as well.
Okay.
You see some symbols. You see one here with test tubes being poured on a person's hand or on a surface. And you can clearly see that it's burning. Okay. So this tells you that this thing can be a skin irritant. It can be corrosive to metal or other materials. There's an exclamation mark here which also speaks to it could damage the eyes and so on. But if you read the label very carefully, so this is not a POPs containing material,
okay,
but it still has some toxicity to it.
Right.
And so we have to be careful whether or not it contains POPs or it is just a regular household chemical or something that a farmer or backyard gardener can use. To read our labels very carefully and to ensure that we use the product as directed.
You said reading. Mr. Clarkson, as you interact and educate and transfer technology and best practices, what other advice do you have for farmers when using these excellent products from the TDC Home and Building Depot?
Other advice would include practice safety first. And, of course, they are pesticides. They have some level of toxicity, and they can harm the body. So therefore, wear your gloves. And I'm not referring to some cloth type gloves. Wear some rubber gloves, long sleeve and the gloves should come up to about 14 inches. Wear long pants and boots. Wear a respirator and face covering to protect the eyes, because you want to ensure that this product does not splash on your face, splash on your eyes, splash on any part of your body. And after applying the product, that wear that you have, take it off, put that in a container separately for laundering. Those clothing should not be mixed with your regular clothes, and go directly and take a shower and change.
Based on what you just said then, in my mind, a commercial farm employing persons or an institution that involves testing or close contact with these chemical agents, one would assume that there is protocol for them to change clothes and shower, because at times those individuals might very well be going on our public buses to be part of a trip of 12, 15 people. Mm-hmm. So that's advice that you're giving to all persons, not only to protect themselves,
to protect others,
but
also
to protect others.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming their oversights, assuming that POPs gets into the system, Dr. Natta, is there any research that shows that the presence of POPs, irrespective of the way it enters the body, is there any association with illnesses or diseases or complications that we should be aware of?
Yes, definitely. POPs have been linked to a decline in the population of animals globally once they're exposed to them, because they cause various diseases in animals. In human beings, of course, POPs have also been directly linked to cancers, as well as liver and kidney diseases. It also, of course, you can imagine those that we spoke about earlier, the unintentionally produced ones which come from burning. If you're burning any household or medical waste and you're close by, breathing in that particulate matter, that smoke from that, can cause, respiratory issues. They have also been linked to reproductive issues in humans.
Hold a minute here, please. When you say reproductive, I'm getting a little bit concerned. I don't know if Clarkson share this concern, but I have been planning for a few years now. I'm still planning and thinking and strategizing.
How much is a few?
About for the last 20 years, and I gave myself a 30-year thinking period.
Okay.
As to getting children. Are you saying that I could be in jeopardy if exposed to POPs?
If exposed, there is a possibility that you can damage your reproductive system.
You're saying cancers, you're saying allergies, you're saying irritation of the skin.
That's right.
You're saying damage to the endocrine?
Endocrine system.
Oh, endocrine. It sounded like you were saying end of crime. Forgive me. You were saying the immune system.
Right.
You were saying all of those things. If all of us don't work to reduce, if not eliminate, POPs, is it a threat for humans only? Or can it be extended to, for example, the child of a pregnant lady or a newborn?
Yes. It's humans, it's animals, it's the natural environment on a whole. But definitely pregnant mothers, there have been studies done in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the Caribbean region and even globally, that looked at the breast milk of mothers, that looked at the transfer between from the mother to the fetus of an unborn child, an unborn. And so it can be transferred if exposed to POPs. Humans, the animals can transfer it even to their young as well through breast milk and while in the womb.
That's interesting. So it's cyclical, not only in the air, but in the soil, in the water, but even amongst generations.
That's right.
That's correct.
And what is even more precarious for us to consider is the fact that you're saying it's long-lasting. And it lies in the fatty tissue.
Right.
So one could extrapolate and say even children who may have some fatty tissue, it may be trapped at the infant stage, at the baby stage.
Yes.
let me switch. And that is, we're talking about children. I think that's a good segue for me to talk now about the poetry competition again, because it targets children, secondary school as well as primary school. And it's a competition where you can win all sorts of cash prizes and other prizes. Ask your teachers, ask your principals, ask your parents to be a part of it. My number is 662-6624 if you need further information. Here's an opportunity for you to write a 4-verse or 4-stanza poem for the primary schools, or a 6-verse or 6-stanza poem for the secondary schools. Then you're shortlisted. The top 5 from primary will compete against each other. Top 5 from secondary compete against each other in the spoken word competition. And then you have cash prizes of, if my recollection serves me correctly, over $500 at times for the first place. Then you have top 1, 2, 3 getting cash prizes, consolation prizes of $75 for the finalists. The teachers who assist will also get a little stipend. And all of that because you're taking action in the Stop the Pops, Identify, Learn and Act project. Gentlemen, as we wrap up, if you were to give 2 bits of advice per person to our viewers, to our listeners, what would those 2 bits of advice be? Mr. Clarkson.
One of my favorite is no indiscriminate burning. If you have waste, we have the solid waste. They have a landfill, pack it up, get it ready for the truck, and let them deliver it. Do not, absolutely do not burn it at your place. Do not put it on your neighbor's empty lot and burn it. Do not throw it in the ravine or in the gut sides, as we like to say. Do not, do not, do not. My second advice to you is be safe in what you're doing. For those of you who are handling pesticide, wear your safety gear at all times when handling, from mixing to application to rinsing, and after you have done so, separate your clothing, take that shower. Ensure your safety at all times.
Dr. Natter, your 2 bits of advice.
I just want to first say that St. Kitts and Nevis, again, reiterate that St. Kitts and Nevis is in a good place as it pertains to POPs being in our country in any way, whether it's in the environment, in our bodies. We don't produce it, we don't import them. So we're in a very good place. But notwithstanding that, and notwithstanding the hard work that our border control agencies do in making sure that we do not get these POPs containing materials into the country, I advise persons to support, eat local fruits and vegetables and meats, because these you are guaranteed that they are POPs free. And secondly, we want to, educate ourselves some more. So visit stopthepops.com. That's a great resource. You can visit sknbs.org, which is the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards website. And you can even just do an internet search for POPs chemicals, and there is a vast array of educational material out there for that. But again, St. Kitts and Nevis is in a great place as it pertains to POPs, and so we just want to keep that going, and with your help, the general public's help, we'll go a long way to keeping St. Kitts POPs free.
As I think about the advice you've given, and if I were to create a taxonomy of bits of advice, I see one label being knowledge, increasing knowledge. And not only increasing your knowledge, but then sharing the knowledge. I also see behavioral change when it comes to making purchases. And the thing about it, it may not be here in St. Kitts, because you've already given us the guarantee that the TDC group of companies has a clean bill of health. You've already told us, Dr. Natter, that the coefficients done in the inventory and the testing, Sinkis is in good standing, as well as Nevis. However, there are times when persons, for lack of a better term, try to sneak things in
Right.
and forego the customs checkpoints and everything else. I could only imagine, Mr. Clarkson, that some persons may have come to you before in your department and say, well, I saw this on television, I saw this in another country, why can't we get it? And once you explain that protocol to them, those individuals might try something. We're asking that you do not. You stick to the protocol.
Do not.
I also see consumption being another category. Our behaviors during consumption. For example, a lot of people often say that the fatty tissue of meat kinds add flavor and aroma, and you could almost just fall in love and start to make love to it when the fragrance comes out of the frying pan. That we cut off the fatty tissue because pops, as a collective, has a tendency to be stored there. I also see. Go ahead.
You could get away with that with still having some of the fatty tissue there if you eat local.
If you eat local.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, I like that. So buying local is another bit of advice. I also see storage coming out as a point of discussion. How and where these chemicals are stored. And even if it's not pops as an ingredient, insecticides, fungicides, pesticides, all of those other agents, storage, and lastly, disposal. Talking about not dumping, talking about not burning, talking about the correct permissions to dispose of all of these things. And I think it's our civic duty as individuals, as communities, and by extension, we are part of a wider community, as a country, to be a concerned citizen as we move cohesively to stop the pops, to identify, to learn, and act, not only for us today, but for generations to come. Dr. Natta, your final words.
I just want to thank you so much for the opportunity. It is a great project that is being executed by our friends in Trinidad with the Basel Convention Regional Center. And persistent organic pollutants are a global issue. They might not be a major issue for us here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but as I said, we have to remain vigilant. And I think that's the key thing, one of the key things that came out of our discussion. Be vigilant, be educated, and a program such as this is going to go a long way in changing behaviors, especially as it also targets young persons. And we know young persons, of course, are the changers, for now and for the future. So I just want to thank you once again. And the St. Kitts and Nevis Bureau of Standards, of course, stands ready as the focal point for the Stockholm Convention for St. Kitts and Nevis. We stand ready, of course, to assist in this and other awareness initiatives.
Mr. Clarkson.
Yes, I would like to thank you for inviting the TDC group of companies to be a part of this awareness campaign. We are indeed honored to be a part of it. And throughout this week, we have been putting the word out there, making people, getting people to be aware of what's happening and the status of St. Kitts, and to join the rest of the community in terms of ensuring that we keep our environment safe, we keep our country safe, and by impact, keep the rest of the world as safe as possible. So once again, thank you for the opportunity, and of course, TDC stands ready to always be a good corporate citizen of St. Kitts and Nevis.
Gentlemen, on behalf of the regional partners, my colleagues, Rachel and Laura, over there at the BCRC headquarters in Trinidad, on behalf of my company, Sen Consulting, our local partners, and we must take the opportunity to also thank all of the radio stations. We would have traversed St. Kitts and Nevis, covering 6 radio stations who willingly accommodated us. We are also going to be on television, so we are thanking the television outlets on St. Kitts and Nevis for also accommodating us. It was absolutely a learning experience for me to be alongside you two gentlemen as well as the other panelists we would have had in the likes of Miss Jamila Christopher, Mr. Jermaine Saki Lake, and
Randy Elliott.
Randy Elliott. Okay? Now, so that's Randy Elliott over there in Nevis, Jermaine Saki Lake, and Jamila Christopher, and all of the entities and ministries that those persons worked or work for, who gave permission for them to be a part of it. I thank the ministries of education and the CEOs, and they have different names. It might be the Chief Education Officer over in St. Kitts. I think they go by another name, Principal Education Officer over in Nevis. But they willingly got on board, gave me an opportunity to actually present, have a Zoom meeting with all of the principals to push the project as well as the poem competition, and then they've been disseminating the information. Lastly, I advise all of the listening and viewing public to get on board, Stop the Pops, to identify, to learn and act, and also encourage your children to be a part of the poem and spoken word competition. My name is Noah Mills. I'm saying thank you very much on behalf of Dr. Marcus Natter and Mr. Edward Clarkson. And of course, we came to you today from the TDC Home and Building Depot, our private partners in this venture. Thank you very much, and we do hope that you can become an active advocate for stopping the pops.
What a beautiful morning in Popsville. Time to check the crops. Uh-oh, the insects are back. Farmer Ricky plans to double his dosage to get rid of these pests once and for all. Oh no! No more insecticide. Well, off to the store we go. Hey, it's good old Joe.
Good morning, Joe. I'd like to get 4 bottles of Compound V, please. I'm double dosing to fight back the insects. Compound V, you said? It doesn't sound familiar. Let me see what you have.
Ricky, where did you get this product? It doesn't have proper label information and could be filled with highly hazardous chemicals called persistent organic pollutants. You should really get one that's POPs free, which is safer and approved for pest control. Ricky, it's time we talked about the dangers of misusing highly toxic pesticides. Some pesticides contain highly hazardous ingredients that can harm you and your loved ones if handled incorrectly. So when we improperly store pesticides, it can affect our health in the long and short term. To be safe, make sure to remember these following tips to avoid unnecessary chemical exposure. It's important to always read your label fully before using any treatment on your crops. To avoid dangerous contact with pesticides, including airborne insecticides, make sure to wear appropriate personal protective equipment. Apply the recommended chemical dosage and use far away from human contact and from active winds. To avoid cross-contamination, make sure to follow these simple steps to dispose of pesticide containers. And no matter what you do, don't throw it in any old waste bin. Always make sure to triple rinse, puncture, and store separately for proper disposal.
And for an even safer approach to pesticide use, consider switching to organic farming and other integrated pest management processes.
For more information on how to dispose of hazardous pesticides, contact your local waste management agency or visit stopthepops.com for more details. Sometimes danger lurks where you least expect it. The more you know, the healthier you can grow.